Elaine Codburn, Deputy Superintendent. Today we're going to talk School Finance 101. It's a very complicated topic, and so I created this several years ago to explain finance with no spreadsheets, no numbers. So hopefully when you leave here, you'll understand this a little bit better. Randy Rao is our Chief Financial Officer. This is his first time experiencing my craziness, so he's going to assist so that he can do this on his own one day, and then his Director of Finance, Alex Salazar, is here as well, playing Vanna. So, Taxpayer Tuesday. So I know we've got a joint crowd. Every year we have this series called Taxpayer Tuesday where we bring in the community to see what's going on in our schools, talk about finance, talk about curriculum, all of those things. And so this is the first one for this school year. Here's our schedule. So we do about 6 of these a year. Again, today is the first one, School Finance 101. And then last spring, the legislature met in Texas, so we have a lot of changes from the '89 legislative session. And so November 4th, which I believe is Election Day, we'll be going over those changes. And then you see, again, we meet really about the first Tuesday of every month, unless there's a school calendar issue with that. So we'll meet again in January, February, and May. So you can see the topics there. It is open to the community, so you do not have to be part of Leadership Dripping Springs to participate in this. We would love to see you come back. We average about 10 to 15 people per month, but we would love to see that participation increase. So our objectives today, how many of you are an expert in school finance in Texas?
I know a thing or two.
You know a thing or two? All right. I know a thing or two. That's about all I know. Do you believe that schools get more revenue when your property taxes increase?
No.
Okay, good. You're already ahead. What changed in the '89 legislative session? Anybody know?
A lot.
A lot. Cell phones. That was one. That was a big one. So that impacted you as a family. So after this presentation, we hope you have a better understanding of how school finance works, that you'll be able to explain the general concepts to your neighbor. If you can't, then come back when we talk about recapture, and then understand some of the recent changes that affect funding in schools. All right, so we have a lot of acronyms and a lot of basic understanding. So Randy, this is you. I'm gonna let you go closer to one of those so you can see it.
Yeah, you're way up on this one. So some common funding elements in Texas school district finances, you have, of course, your basic allotment. And what that is, essentially in a nutshell, is every kid is equal $6,160 in 2019. Part of what changed in the legislative session this past spring was it increased to $62.15. And so if every kid showed up every day, then at the end of the year, you get $6,215 for one kiddo. The entitlement is essentially what we're guaranteed, and Elaine will go over this a little bit with what you see up here on the table, but Tier 1. So your basic allotment is equal to your Tier 1 funding. Local share, that's essentially the state's going to kick in a certain amount, and your local property taxes are going to kick in a certain amount to contribute to your Tier 1 funding or the basic allotment for the number of kiddos you have in the district. Your guaranteed yield is essentially enrichment funding above and beyond your Tier 1, and you're guaranteed a certain amount per your penny of tax effort. It used to be tied to the Austin yield, and now, to be honest, I'm not sure if I'm not sure how that's changed. Number. But we do get a guaranteed amount for pennies over and above those that go into the basic allotment. And these are some common acronyms that are used in school finance. Your ADA, which I kind of touched on earlier, it's your average daily attendance. So if you have a kid that's in school and they attend every day of school, my ADA is going to be 1. for that particular kid. If they're out sick, that goes into the calculation. So I think the district is around 95, maybe a little over 95% attendance. So in other words, every dollar that kid could generate is then multiplied by 95%. So we get 95% of that amount. WADA, which is your weighted average daily attendance, that's used for some of the adjustments on some of the programs like special ed, gifted and talented, career and tech. ASF, your available school fund, that's essentially money that every district in the state of Texas gets, and it's funded by earnings like interest and dividends from the permanent school fund, which was an endowment that was set up in the 1800s. I think currently the permanent school fund has maybe like $55 billion in it, and it's one of, I think it's one of, if not the only in the country that is set aside to assist in funding for Texas, for the school districts here in Texas. Your maximum compressed rate, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but in 2019 when the legislature met, they came up with a mechanism to compress tax rates. So as the property value increases above 2.5%, then your tax rate gets compressed downwards. And it's a formula that TEA, our Texas Education Agency, uses. We have to turn data in and around August, and they actually calculate it and tell us, I guess, for lack of a better term, they tell us what our tax rate needs to be. And then your local fund assignment, that's essentially taking into consideration how it's funded. So what's the local share versus what's the state's share? And those items that you see that are in red, we don't know those until almost when the year is over with. So a lot of the planning for budget, when we have to have our budget adopted in June, we don't know what those numbers are until probably 12 to 18 months afterwards. And then the blue, that's even longer. We have to estimate that number in April. We don't know about it till the following year, January.
Really estimated in November.
Right.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, when you look at our total revenue for the general fund, we have three sources. One is state aid, one is local tax collections, and then one is federal funds. Federal funds here is not any grant money in the general fund. This would be indirect cost on grants that we get from the federal government. So you're going to see federal dollars in our general fund are very, very, very minuscule, but it is a part of our total funding source. So when we look at our local revenue, so when you look at all of the revenues in the general fund for the school district this year, 92% of those revenues are locally generated. Of that, 87% is property taxes, and then interest income is about just under 3%. So when you factor out local property taxes, the other local revenues are very small. That might be ticket sales to athletic events or performances that Fine Arts puts on, tuition for pre-K, and then just a bunch of little bitty miscellaneous revenues. So out of the total local revenue pie, the majority of that is property taxes. When you look at the state, for this current year, state revenues make up 7% of our total revenues, but that 7%, 53% of it is what we call TRS on behalf, which is just an accounting entry for the retirement for teachers into the teacher retirement system. So 7% of state revenue makes up our total, but of that 7%, the majority of that is an on behalf payment. So it's an in and an out. So you can see the state doesn't participate a lot in our revenue picture, very small contribution. And then federal funds, we used to have some Medicaid here for children that we provide services to, like speech therapy, other Medicaid-related services. That program has pretty much been stripped at both the state and the federal level. So for this year, all that we really have in federal revenues is indirect cost, and that's an administrative ratio for us administering those federal grants, but it's less than 1% of our total revenue picture. So here's a chart just showing that. Again, the big blue piece of this Pac-Man is local property taxes. All right, so let's talk about property taxes. After doing Taxpayer Tuesday for a couple of years, we realized we were using terms that people didn't necessarily understand. So we're going to take a step back and talk about how your tax bill is calculated. So the very first piece of that is your market value. So that is what the appraisal district says that your property, whether it's a business or a home, what the value is of that property. So fortunately, you don't pay taxes on that value. There are lots of exemptions. And the first one is the homestead. And it is highlighted here in red because in about a month, you're going to be asked to vote on increasing that homestead exemption to 140, right? So it's currently 100,000. If the whole state votes on this change, it'll go up to 140,000. It'll be reflected on your tax bill for 2025. So that, if it's your home, you take that homestead exemption off. Then if you're over 65, you get an additional exemption, and that too is going up. Randy, help me out. Is it 100,000?
I believe so.
So if you're over 65, you're going to see another big reduction to your property. And then if you're disabled or a veteran, you get additional exemptions. So you take all those exemptions and then you get your net taxable value. That is divided by 100, and then you apply the tax rate. So the tax rate is what is adopted by boards. So it might be the school board, it might be city council if it's a city tax, the county commissioners if there's a county tax, you might have a MUD tax, you might have a hospital district tax. So all of those different taxing entities have a component of that tax rate. So for DSISD, the school board sets the school tax rate, and then that is divided by that factor of your net taxable divided by 100. That is your property tax bill. Time for you to go.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Good luck to you. And so that tax rate is represented here by all the checkers. So each checker represents 1 penny on the tax rate. So we also discovered that a penny on the tax rate was confusing. So our total tax rate is $1.1052. So we have 110.52 pennies on our tax rate. And so we're going to talk about how these are broken out into different components. So the first component is M&O. So the maintenance and operations tax is just to operate the district. And then we have another piece of the tax rate that is interest in seeking, and that is to pay our debt payments, to pay the interest and principal on voter-approved debt. So another way to look at this is we have 2 buckets in our tax rate. The green bucket is M&O, and that again is salaries for teachers, for staff, it's transportation, it's classroom supplies, utilities, everything that you could think of that goes into operating the school district. That's the M&O portion of the tax rate. The other side is debt service, that interest in sinking. And this can only be used to pay the principal and interest on voter-approved bonds. So if we had extra money on the INS side, we could not take that and give teachers a raise. We can't take that and pay for the lights for this building. So those dollars pay for the debt issued to build this building. And that's all that can be used for. So that sounds pretty simple, right? But wait, the state said let's make it a little bit more complicated. This M&O piece, so what you saw here, the green bucket, it is further broken in to 2 pieces, which is really 3 pieces. The first is tier 1, which Randy mentioned, is that MCR. So the state tells us what this level 1 tax rate can be, and for us, it's 61.69. So you have 61 point, if we had a half a penny here, you have 61.69 pennies. This is tier 1. It's also called the maximum compressed rate. It's a function of your values and your previous year tax rate, and we have to tax at this. If we lower this, then that 62.15 basic allotment goes down. So this is pretty set, no flexibility here. So that's tier 1 piece of the M&O. Then we have the tier 2 piece of M&O. So also on this tier 1, it is subject to recapture. So the state tells us you have to tax here, but then if it generates too much, we have to send some of that back in the form of recapture. Then we have tier 2. So these are golden and copper pennies. And I will tell you, before House Bill 3 in 2019, I told my friends, I will never talk to my school board about golden and copper pennies. There's no reason. It's too confusing. Well, House Bill 3 came along, and now you kind of have to talk about those. So we have golden and we have copper, and you're going to see why they're golden and copper later. But the important thing about the golden is there's no recapture. So no matter what they bring in tax revenue, we get to keep it. The tier 2 copper, we do pay recapture, and we have 5.83 of those and 8 golden. So these are our tier 1 and tier 2 M&O pennies. Then remember the total tax rate is M&O and INS. So the INS pennies are over here. We have 35 of those. There's no recapture, but these dollars are restricted, right, to pay debt. So Randy's going to talk to you a little bit more about that MCR. So the state tells us what that's going to be, but there's some complications with that.
Yeah, so this is getting back to the acronyms that we had visited earlier. Essentially, the maximum compressed rate is a result of a formula that TEA has come up with. Essentially, when your property grows from one year to another in excess of 2.5%, then your rate gets compressed. Now, the part that we don't know, and TEA is the one that does this calculation, is that no district can have a rate that's less than 90% of any other district. And so we only really know Dripping Springs. TEA has all the other districts, so that's the reason we have to funnel all this information into them, so that they can come back and tell us what this rate is. And to me, it's important to note, the board adopts this, but the board doesn't really get to choose this. And then what Elaine was mentioning earlier, if you don't use the rate that TEA calculates, your maximum rate, then your basic allotment gets reduced proportionately, so that you're losing money, essentially.
Wait, this is you.
Oh, me too. Okay, so the tier 1, as we mentioned, it's our basic allotment. It goes by the number of students and average daily attendance, so the percentage of attendance that the kids have. It's our district demographics is how we, I guess, estimate what this is, because here again, we don't know until the end of the school year how many kids we're really going to have and what the attendance rate is. And so we have a demographer that provides us demographics on estimating those numbers. We also kind of do it in-house too, with some student demographics with our past history and trying to gauge that going forward. Part of the maintenance and operations also has what's considered a fast growth allotment. And so we are considered a fast growth school district, and so we get a little bit extra funding for that. This campus, as Steve had mentioned earlier today, had 550 some odd kids. It's a new campus, so we actually get NIFA, New Instructional Facilities Allotment. And so we have to estimate that number at the beginning, and I think we used 500 kids, and so there'll be a settle up at the end of the year. And then we have some new allotments under the 89th legislative session that we'll go over here. All of this is all part of Tier 1. Going back to the maximum compressed rate, you can see here on the bottom, in 2019, we were at $1 on our Tier 1 rate. And since then, with property values growing, it has gone down to just a little over, almost 62 cents. Tier 2, as Elaine was mentioning earlier, we have the 8 golden pennies. That's part of Tier 2 funding. Copper pennies, those are ones that the voters in the district had to approve. I think we have the ability to have 17 cents over and above our Tier 1 tax rate. I think we did have 17 cents at one point in time.
16 when we did the TRE.
And then in 2019, that got compressed down to the 13.8 cents, which are these two here. Then again, as we mentioned earlier, the WADA, or weighted average daily attendance, your Tier 2 calculation is based on the number of students in WADA and the number of approved pennies.
Okay, so how does all this work? That's the background. So our Tier 1 entitlement is our revenue, and it's going to be represented by this jar. So the first thing is the basic allotment, the 6215 times our ADA. Then we're going to have additional weights for certain students. So special populations, ESL, English as a second language learners, career tech, SPED, gifted and talented. Any student that's receiving a special program or additional services beyond basic classroom instruction is going to get us a little bit more money. And then we have certain allotments for special programs. Randy mentioned the new instructional facilities, fast growth. So we take all of these calculations, and that's what is generates our revenue. What do you not see in any of this? Taxes. So taxes don't go into determining how much our revenue is. These three components go into there. So let's just do a demonstration. So the size of our jar is going to be based on all of those factors that go in here, right? So the first thing is going to be our kids. So if our kids come to school every day, they fill up the jar and potentially make the jar bigger. Now, if we were a Dallas ISD, we have a lot more kids, our jar would be a lot bigger. If we're a Wimberley ISD, our jar would be smaller because we have fewer students, right? Our pre-K kids, the little babies here, they only get funding for coming for a half day. So even if they come all day, the state gives us money for them as if they're here a half day. So our kids go into their jar, and that determines the size, but does every kid come every day? Nope. So we take some of those kids out because they don't come every day. So our jar just got smaller. Then you can see we have all of these weights and allotments. So we get money for transportation, so that makes up the size of the jar. That's a new one. That's a new one. Fast growth. So fast growth is fun to calculate because we don't know if we're fast growth until the state has determined how many districts across the state are fast growth. So we think that we're fast growth, but if we have some districts in Dallas or Houston that grow faster than we do, then by the time they go down the list, we may not get this. It's also capped, so the state says we'll fund fast growth by X amount, but if there are more fast growth districts than we have money for, then we're gonna prorate it, so you might not get all of this, we may have to chop your block some. And then the new instructional facilities allotment. So what this is, when you build a new campus, there's a lot of supplies that go into opening a new campus, right? So this isn't to help you build the campus, this is to help you buy stuff that you can't pay for with bond money, like scissors, glue, paper, those things that you need to run this school, but you can't put in a bond. So that's gonna make our jar even bigger. Then this year, we have 3 new allotments, and Randy's gonna talk about those in a minute, but I'm gonna go ahead and throw them into the jar to show that it could make our jar bigger, right? So we put all of those in. This is what we call our tier 1 cost, our allotment, our entitlement. All of those words are interchangeable, okay? So you might say, that's our tier 1 entitlement, that's our tier 1 allotment, that's our tier 1 cost. It all means the same thing. The question now becomes, who's gonna pay for this jar? But before we go in there, I'm gonna let Randy talk about some of those new allotments. So there's basically 3 of them, and one of them really helped teachers, and the other 2 gave us a little bit more money. It's Sandy. It's Sandy.
So there are a lot of stuff came out of the 89th legislation. 3 important ones are these new allotments. I guess the most important one is the teacher retention allotment. And essentially it's pass-through money. So in 2019, when the legislature met and they increased the basic allotment to $61.60, I mean, we all know what happened after 2019. You know, COVID hit, we had double-digit inflation, costs went up, the allotment never changed. So we had to pay more for insurance, we had to pay more for utilities, we had to pay more for fuel, salaries in some instances. And so school districts across the state were having what you would consider structural deficits. There was not enough money coming in to offset these costs. So one of the things that was bantered back and forth during the legislative session was there was money that was going to come to the districts, but how was that money going to flow? The teacher retention allotment increased the teacher salaries, and you can see here. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going into too much detail. Okay.
You got a whole slide on it.
Okay. So we'll jump forward on that in a bit. The support staff retention allotment was essentially for non-teachers, non-admin folks. So like your custodians, your librarians, teacher aides, those kind of folks. Then we had a basic cost allotment, which the legislature did take into consideration increased in costs like insurance and utilities and fuel, things like that. So the basic cost allotment is an additional allotment that's supposed to help cover some of those costs. Then we have some minor ones. We get a certain amount of money per SPED evaluation that we do. We get some college prep, career readiness assessment, and then some certification exam reimbursements. Okay, so here's the teacher retention allotment. It provides a pay increase for teachers, and 0 to 2, they didn't get anything through the teacher retention allotment. 3 to 4 got an additional $2,500.
That's gonna stay.
And then if you were 5 years or more, a teacher with 5 or years more of experience, then you got $5,000. And that was for Dripping, the size of district that we are. What kind of made it a little, which it's not on the slide, but like a district like Wimberley, this number here was $10,000. And so it made battling, you know, as Steve was talking about earlier, trying to get teachers hired, you know, Wimberley's just down the road, so it made battling for those teachers a lot more difficult. And these are sometimes unintended consequences that happen when the state gets their hands in stuff.
Can I ask you a question? Is it because you got a percentage or a set amount to divvy
No,
them
it's
up?
the size of district.
It's only based on size.
Size of
District.
So smaller districts got a larger
They got
chunk.
larger.
However.
Now, these dollars flow in here, but they also flow right back out. So we didn't put them in here because it's in and out.
Right. And it is, that's what Elaine was saying, it's just a one-time adjustment. And so the funding will be there again next year, but it's only for the 2,500. They don't get an additional 2,500 or an additional 5,000. If a teacher is going to see a raise next year, it's going to be on the back of the district. And then on top of that, you have to give what the state has mandated with the 2,500 and the 5,000. The support staff retention allotment, that's to pay for salary increases for the 0 to 2. Since the state didn't give anything for them, we can use this additional $45 per average daily attendance to fund those 0 to 2 year teachers. Other eligible staff, as I mentioned earlier, librarians, teacher aide, custodians, bus drivers, those are all considered support staff.
That goes in the dark.
Yes. And that's essentially an out too, right?
If you're using it on salaries, yeah.
Yeah. And then the basic cost allotment, it's $106 per enrolled student. So that's a little bit different than ADA. The ADA is based on attendance, enrolled student is just based on the students. And we can use it for transportation, health insurance costs on the rise, utilities, our property insurance. And funding under this allotment is applied automatically moving forward. So they did put in statute for this to increase or to keep up with the costs going forward.
All right.
So you want me to drive while you?
Yes, so when I left off, I said, we know how much revenue we have, now we gotta determine who pays for it, right? So the first scenario is that you, let's just go through this. So the first scenario, everybody's gonna get available school funds. So that's state money represented by red sand. So we're gonna pour in the red sand first, and it's not very much, so it's not going to cover the revenues very far. So even recapture districts get that, so we're gonna have two scenarios here. So we're gonna start with our red sand, 2 equal revenue jars. So that's the first step. Then we're going to, the state's gonna say, okay, how much can you bring in tax collections? So notice the state isn't putting theirs in yet. They want to see what your tax collections are. So they're going to say, okay, your tax rate is going to give you this much in tax collections.
It's important to know no actual students were harmed.
So there's your tax collection. Now remember, this is just your MCR tax collections. This is not your golden and copper pennies. So in this scenario, the tax collections do not cover all the revenues. They don't fill the jar. So now what's going to happen is the state is going to use their foundation school program money, and they're going to complete your revenue picture by filling you up to the top. Not any more than you need, not any less. That's how your revenue is going to be determined. So that's a typical situation for the majority of school districts in the state. The second situation is, again, you get your available school fund, and then your tax collections fill up the the rest of the jar. And this does not happen this well very often. So when your tax collections hit the top, is there any room for blue sand? So you're done. So your tax collections exactly match what your revenue is. That's the second scenario. The third scenario is you got your available school fund, you got your tax collections, but now your tax collections from that MCR are more than you need to fill up the jar. So what does that mean?
Recapture.
That is what is recapture. And so we sweep those dollars up and we send them to the state in the form of recapture.
To the general fund.
To the general fund. Now remember, this is on that 6169. We can't change that 6169. So our values didn't go up enough this year to lower the 6169, but we did have a little bit less recapture. But that's when recapture comes into play. We'll clean that up later. All right, well then what happens to these tier 2 enrichment dollars? Well, they're called enrichment because the school board and the voters can decide to approve these pennies to enhance your program. So after the recapture, maybe you still don't have enough to cover the programs that you offer. So these golden and copper pennies come into play. So remember, these golden, they are not recapture. So we have 8. They give us $129.52 per WADA. So this is weighted ADA, which is going to be a higher number because of those special programs. This jar is going to be, the size of this jar is going to be determined by taking this 129.52 times the WADA times the number of pennies we have. If our tax collections spill over this, it doesn't matter, we get to keep it. That's why they're called golden. If our 8 pennies don't fill up that 129 times WADA, guess what? The state kicks in the money, so it's a guaranteed yield. So these are golden, you don't give anything back to the state, you keep them all, and so this is the hill I die on. Do not get rid of your golden pennies.
Right. Is there a, like you said, INS is only allowed to be spent on INS. If there is excess in the golden and copper, are you allowed to relocate that where you need it, or does it stay there?
You can use these dollars for debt service, but it's tricky in how you do that. The state kind of frowns upon that. It would be an unusual situation where these cover everything and you have more to put over here.
Sure.
That's not gonna happen. These copper pennies, we did have a total of 17 enrichment pennies, but the copper ones started going down with 2019 House Bill 3. So we now have 5.83. They are subject to recapture. They're only guaranteed to yield 49.72 per WADA. So you take 49.72 times your WADA times the 5.83, and that gives you your revenue. If that results in too much from that yield, then you send that back in the form of recapture. So Randy's got some real life numbers here for us. So looking at the last 2 years, this is what our golden pennies look like.
Yeah, so you can see in 24-25 and 25-26, now 24-25 is probably 95% complete as far as our numbers. Again, 25-26 is based on estimates, estimated students, estimated property value, and so forth. But as it stands right now, our WADA in 24-25 is just a little over 10,000. You can see that guaranteed amount of $129.52 times our approved pennies, the 8 that Elaine was mentioning, and that gets us 10.3 million. We're actually bringing in the vast majority of that through our local tax effort, our local tax dollars, 8.6 But then the state, because this is guaranteed, they have to kick in that additional 1.6. 1.7. When you look at the copper pennies, same type of setup, same logic. The guaranteed yield now is 49.28. Our approved pennies on there are a little over 5 cents, 0.0583. That brings in an additional 2.8 million. But in our tax collections, we're bringing in a little over 6. So the sand that just got swept up on those copper pennies is $3.4 million. That has to go back to the state.
So you might say, why do we keep those copper pennies when you're paying so much recapture on them? And this is why.
And so what we did here is we took the budget that we had and tried to match it up under each one of the components. Your tier 1, 2 for golden pennies, and tier 2 for copper. And what you can see on those copper pennies, even though we're bringing in money on there, and you take the recapture back out, we're still netting $3 million. When you look at our entire, for the district, the entire athletic program and fine arts programs, you're looking at about $3 million in costs. So if we didn't have those pennies, in order to save $3 million, you have to start looking really hard at some program cuts.
So it sounds bad that we pay recapture on these, but what Randy is saying, by netting the 3 million after recapture, is keeping us from trying to find another 3 million to cut out of our budget. I think when we started the 25-26 budget, we were looking for 5 million to cut. And we got down to about 2 and we could not figure it out. And we said, okay, board, we're going to designate fund balance to cover utilities until we know what comes out of this legislative session. And so we did net enough to not have to cut an additional 2 million. But this is why we keep the copper pennies. Is there a day in the future where those don't net us enough to keep them potentially? So we watch what those copper pennies give to us, but right now we're just not in a situation where we can get rid of them.
And then, excuse me, then these next few slides are just kind of some graphs that can hopefully visually show you. In 2016, you can see our tax rate for M&O was at $1.17.
Yeah, go around.
I can't
It's
read that
tiny.
even with my glasses on. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna stand out here, make sure y'all stay awake. All right, so in 2016, we were at a $1.17 tax rate. That held steady until 2019, when the Texas legislative session met and they initiated House Bill 3. That's when the basic allotment went up to 6160. That's when the maximum compressed tax rate went into effect. And so from that point forward, you can see on the M&O, as property values have increased, the tax rate has gone down. In 24-25, the rate stayed the same. Why? Well, in November, y'all are going to go out and vote for a $140,000 increase in the homestead, or excuse me, an increase in the homestead exemption to $140,000. So when we compare property values, we're comparing homestead property values at $100,000 in 2024's tax year to $140,000 in 2025 tax year. So the increase in property values was less than 1%. It was 0.88. If you'll remember, if you're below the 2.5%, there's no compression. So our tax rate essentially stayed the same on the M&O side. On the INS side, you can see from 2016, it's been 35 cents since 2016. All the while, Dripping Springs voters have passed 3 bond elections with no increase on the tax rate. And then this just shows the two stacked together for the total tax rate. And there again, you're going to see it decreasing mainly because of the M&O side. And so where does the money go? Earlier, we showed you a pie chart on where the money was. The vast majority, 78% of our budget goes to payroll
Remember, this one's with recapture.
with recapture. Almost 5% of our budget is for recapture. And then you can see how some of the other items play out. When you take recapture out, because you have to think of recapture as almost a net revenue. So when you're looking at just our regular budget, almost 83% of it is payroll. In utilities, 2.4% of our budget is utilities. Insurance, just the insurance for the district, our property insurance, our auto liability, all of that is just a little over 1% of our budget. All right. Test time,
Go ahead,
right?
ask them.
So how does the district earn more revenue?
More kids.
Better attendance.
Basic allotment finally increased. By how much?
55.
Y'all are good. How many golden pennies do we have?
8.
And a bonus question. If tax collections increased, but our student ADA stayed the same, does recapture go up or down? Correct.
So I do have a question about the copper pennies. And then, do I understand that the copper pennies are specifically for the programs that are in addition to just your schooling? So that's the athletic programs?
Therefore, whatever you want to spend them on, they're not, the state doesn't say you have to spend them on some certain things. We just try to equate our budget to what those are bringing in as far as revenue. So remember, they're supplemental, they're enrichment, they call them enrichment pennies. So they just give the district more dollars to operate on.
So then the state decides you can only, they set a cap at how much you can pull in for that?
They set a cap on how many you can have.
I see, okay. So increasing programs and increasing the cost to the district doesn't allow us to keep more of that recapture?
No.
Okay.
These are a function of property values, and so we had, it's 17 minus 8. We had 9 in 2019. As the basic allotment increases, these go down, but these were compressed in 2019. So they went from the 9 to 5.83. They've stayed there because the basic allotment hasn't changed. They will go down in the future potentially, the number of them. But if we wanted to get more, if we wanted to go back to 9, we would have to go to the voters, and the voters would have to approve those. So we can't, the board can't just say, let's get more copper pennies. The voters have to approve that. So when we go to the voters and say we want additional copper pennies, but we're gonna pay 60% of what they bring in back to the state, that's not a winning proposition, right?
And the state kind of caps it in a sense where the yield is $49.
I see.
And so that's when you're taking that amount times the number of pennies, that's your cap. And so we're actually bringing in more than that amount, and then that's what goes back to recapture.
If we had more ADA, we would get to keep more because it's a function of your WADA.
Okay.
So it's a fluid number throughout the year until we know what our total kid population was. I think Monica had a
Yeah,
question.
can if we pass the increase of home tax exemption from 100,000 to 140, is that just gonna shave off some recapture, or is it gonna dig into our budget?
It's already factored into this, so our recapture this year is what, 4 million, and it was
Yeah.
11 million last
So
year.
you already have it estimated in?
We already have that estimated.
Okay.
So I'm assuming y'all are all gonna vote yes.
Yeah.
That was an excellent, I sat through a lot of school board stuff, and it's a great representation, I like all of it, I wanted to say that. I was a little more versed on the underwriting issue, I was just curious, Derby Springs, what was their credit rating for their bond issue?
So we have a double, all school districts get a AAA from the permanent school fund, but you have an underlying issue, so we're a AA2 on Moody's and a AA on S&P, I believe.
Oh, okay. That's still a 0% default rate for double
Yes.
delay.
Yes, and so AAA paper is highly popular in the market, which is what permanent school fund is for all Texas schools.
The last couple of years, there's been a push from all the schools, which I think is great, about the attendance. So they're more advocating for that. Have you noticed an improvement in that? Or
I
has
believe
that-
it went up slightly last year. I think we're shooting for 96.5 at most campuses. We did not get to 96.5 last year. It ticked up, but 97 would be fabulous. It's good for learning and it's good for the finances, but you know, make sure your kids are in school during attendance taking time. Don't schedule your dentist appointments in the morning. Schedule them in the afternoon.